everyone, welcome back to my channel for another video. Thank you for joining me for today's video, which is going to be our monthly reading game where we let the game decide how many books we get to read for this video. And this month, our game is our Bookish vacation game where we travel to different destinations around the world and read a book set in that location. I think I last played this back in March and we read books from Africa and space, and I really had a fun time playing this game. The one nice thing about this game is I have a little bit more leeway in choosing what books I'm going to read than some of my other games. So let me go ahead and give you a quick description of how this game is going to work. First off, we have our board here. There are different tokens on it. Trains, well, that's actually a plane, automobile, and trains. And at the beginning of each game, we will determine which transportation mode we go on. If we land on planes, that means that we'll be taking the shortest route to our destination, so less books to read. And car is obviously the longer route with train right in the middle. One of the additions I made to this game was creating boarding passes for our destinations instead of just slips of paper. So at the beginning of each trip we go on, we'll choose 2 destinations. There's a boarding pass for each continent as well as for fantasy worlds and space. We'll put them into these little boarding pass holders randomly and then use a spinning wheel to choose what color boarding pass holders we'll be going to. Then when we're choosing books, there's 3 different ways we'll be choosing books. The first is through random prompts. So we'll choose a random little origami suitcase I made. So this is our random origami suitcase. It's got wheels, it's got a little holder, and inside each suitcase, there will be a little slip of paper that will hold our prompt, and we just have to find a book that meets the prompt that is set in one of the 2 destinations that we're going to on our trip. The second way to choose our books will be by genre, and if we get a genre choice, we have these little luggage tags in this bag, and each luggage tag is going to have a different genre on it. So we just have to choose a book that fits our genre. And then last is our dice roll challenge, where we'll be rolling a dice a couple of times and have to fulfill whatever, it's not really a prompt, but whatever the description is for that dice roll. It'll make a little bit more sense if we actually play that game. All right, I think that is all I have. So let's go ahead and first choose our destination. Okay, in all attempts of clarity, this is going to be our second time choosing the boarding passes because I just did that and we got Africa and space. And that is exactly what we got for our first bookish reading game. So to get something a little different, we're going to try this a second time. I just wanted to let you guys know. All right, so let's go ahead, try this again. I don't mind if I get Africa and something else or space and something else. I just didn't want to have the exact same combination as I did the first time I played through, considering there's a lot of other options than those 2. All right, so let's do this again. Let's first pull up our spinning wheel. All right, here's our spinning wheel with all the options on it again. So let's go ahead, spin it twice, and see where we're going on this, our second episode of our bookish vacation game. Here we go, spin 1. I'm just going for fantasy world, Europe. Those are where some of my TBR books are set. Green. All right, so here's our green one. We'll hide that one and spin it one more time. All right, spin number 2. Ooh, blue or pink? It's going to stop on blue. All right, so we have green and blue this time around. All right, let's do our green one first. And we will be going to Europe. All right, I will take that. I know some of my TBR books are set in Europe. So that's our first destination. And our second one is South America and Antarctica. All right. 2 new options that aren't the same as our first game. Imagine that. So those are the places that our books have to be set in, either Europe, South America, or Antarctica. Let's now bring up the game board. We'll choose our mode of travel and then go ahead and do our first roll. All right, first thing we have to do before we play the game is color in the countries that we read a book from last month, which was just Ghana for last month since our other two books were set in space. So I'm going to pull up the random color wheel and we'll see what color we are coloring it in with. Here we go. All right, here's our color wheel again. Let's see what color we'll be coloring Ghana. All right, purple. All right, we have Ghana colored in. Now let's see what transportation mode we will be traveling on. So let's bring up that spin wheel. All right, here is our spin wheel for transportation. So let's see if we're going by car, train, or airplane. I think train. Train's right in the middle. Perfect. All right, we'll be going by train. Can't complain about that. This means we'll only be taking the train token, so we don't have to land on the car or the airplane. All right, we'll be using a 6-sided die. Let's go ahead and do our first roll. A 2. 1, 2. All right, so let's see if we're going to choose our book through a suitcase prompt, a baggage tag genre, or the dice roll challenge. Here we go. All right, we'll be doing a suitcase prompt. So here are our 25 suitcases. We're going to choose one, and then whatever prompt is inside it, that is the book that we have to find to meet that prompt, obviously. All right, let's see. Which one shall we go with? I'm thinking this orange one in the back here. I just really like this origami paper. So we're going to go with this one. As usual in these games, we rolled a 2. That's no surprise there since we typically get 1s or 2s. And we ended up having to choose a suitcase prompt, and we went with this lovely orange suitcase right here. So let's go ahead and open it up. And inside is our prompt. Hopefully this is a good one. So let's see what prompt we have to do to find our book. All right, so it has to be a book that is part of a series. And it has to be either set in Europe, South America, or Antarctica. So let me take a look through my TBR first. And if not, see if I can find a book that has a white cover that meets this prompt. And we will go from there. So I'll meet you guys back here once I have found some options or maybe the actual book. So I'll be right back. So there is one book off my TBR that meets both the destination and this prompt. 2 other books would have met it, of course, The Dark Archives, which is part of the Invisible Library series, and The Girl with the Dragon's Tattoo, which is part of the Millennium series. But I have already started those books and have been reading them when I'm not filming these other reading games, so I can't really use either of those. So the one book that does meet the criteria is our middle grade book on our TBR. And that is Green Witch by Suzanne Cooper, which is the 3rd book in the Dark is Rising sequence. So these books are set in Cornwall. It's a fantasy series that was written a while back. I think the 1970s was when this one came out. The Dark is Rising is probably the most famous of the 5 books. I read these when I was back in the middle grade age and really enjoyed them. So I plan to do a reread and have made it through the 3rd book so far. So this book kind of combines the 1st and 2nd book in the series. The first book, the main characters in the first book, which is a group of siblings, finally kind of meet up with the main character in the 2nd book, which is the 7th son of a 7th son, or 9th son of a 9th son, 7th son, whatever number son. And together they have to recover a priceless golden grail stolen by the forces of evil, which is the dark, which the characters from both books have been kind of fighting by themselves. So this book is not too long. It's only 131 pages, so it shouldn't take me too long to read it. It's about lunchtime now. So I'm going to go ahead and get this done. So I will meet you guys here when I have finished this book, and we'll go ahead and do our next roll and choose our next book at that time point. So I'll see you guys back here at the fireplace soon. I am so excited to be getting another book off of my TBR, and a short one at that. All right, I am back. It's late afternoon and I have finished Greenwich by Suzanne Cooper. There's a Greenwich on the cover. So overall, this was just a fun journey back to the fantasies that were written back in the 1970s, which are very different when you compare them to fantasies today, whether you're looking at middle grade fantasies or adult fantasies. Things that were written back then definitely just have a different feel to them than the fantasies that are written today. Neither good nor bad, just different. And it's nice to kind of journey back into the past to read that type of writing while still, reading fantasies from today. It's just a nice little change of pace. So like I said, this book follows the main characters in the first book in the series, Oversea Under Stone, and in the second book of the series, The Dark is Rising. We have the Drew siblings, which are Simon, Jane, and Barney, who are the ones in the first book who went on the quest to get a object for the light and to keep the dark from getting it. And then the second book, we have Will Stanton, who is the, I figured out, ninth son of the ninth son. And therefore he has some powers, and he is part of the light fighting off the dark in the second book. And in this book, the two groups come together to find a grail that has been stolen from a museum that the dark has now taken, and they kind of join forces to fight off the dark and to get that grail back. The thing is that the Drew siblings don't know that Will Stanton has these special powers, that he is part of the light, because it's kind of a secret that he has to keep, and he can't, come right out to say it. And they're kind of a little bit standoffish to him in the beginning, not because they don't like him, but because they want him they want to have some time away from him so that they can go find the grail, because they don't want to tell him about the grail either, thinking he's just a normal child, and they can't loop him into that. So there's a lot of kind of back and forth with that going on in the story. I also like how in this story, everything's just so simplified. We have good and evil, which are known as the dark and the light. We have wild magic, which is the magic of nature, basically. The Greenwich has wild magic. And we also have the thing of power, which is the object of power that, when combined with the other thing of power, creates a object of even higher power. So everything's just kind of named very simply in this book, compared to fantasies nowadays that have these names that sometimes you can't even pronounce. So overall, this was just a fun quest book set in Cornwall, centered around the ceremony of the Greenwich, which the people in this town of Cornwall have every year. And it was just a fun little non-stalogue, I can never say that word, book to read. And while, not a lot happened, it was written it took place in a very short period of time, said about over a week. It was just a, fun little book to read that is just a lot different than the books that I've read recently. So definitely a series to read yourself, to see if it's something that if you have kids that they may like, because it's definitely different, like I said, than middle grade books nowadays. But I think it's also a nice change from the more adventure, more action oriented books that are written these days, because it's still interesting. It still keeps your attention, but without as much action. It's more kind of atmospheric, a little bit more, it's a little bit more, I guess, atmospheric, a little bit more slow pace, and honestly, probably a good book to read before kids go to bed. So that is Greenwich by Susan Cooper. We have knocked off a book from our TBR. We have also knocked off a book in the 5-book series. We're moving on to book 4. So hopefully by the end of this year, we will have completed the series. We shall see. But that is book 1 on our trip. We now need to go ahead and do roll 2 on this trip. There are 6 spaces left until the ending, so there's a potential we might only read 2 books on this trip. If that is so, then if I have time, we'll play a second round of this. We'll just kind of have to play it by ear to see how many books I end up with, because there are, 6 spots until the end. So I could very easily end up reading 6 books if you watch these types of videos from you before. So let's bring up this game board and go ahead and do our second roll of the game. All right, here is our game board. You can see we are right there. There are 6 spots until we reach the end. So let's go ahead and do our second roll, see what we get. All right, we got a 6. I can't believe it. That means we will be finishing this particular trip, which is 2 books, but that gives us a chance to go on a second trip and try out some other destinations. So I'm excited about that. So let's go ahead, move our piece forward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We will read one more book. This is the only game where once I hit the finish line, I do read one additional book because it is a shorter game. So let's go ahead, bring up the spinning wheel and see how we'll be choosing our second book for this trip. All right, here is our book game choices. So let's go ahead, spin the wheel and see what we get. Oh, oh. Okay, that sounded interesting. It looks like we will be doing the dice roll challenge, which I'm super excited about. So how this is going to work is on the side of the screen, I'm going to put up a little list that says what the numbers 1 through 8 stand for, and we're going to go ahead and roll the dice for the first time. Now, once we roll the dice for the first time, under each of these choices on the list, there are another 8 options that we will roll the dice for the second time, and then we'll have to choose a book based on that option. So let's go ahead and roll our 8-sided dice for the first time and see what category we will be choosing under. All right, here we go. All right, 2. So we will be choosing a book based on the color of the cover. All right, on the side of the screen, you can see what the numbers 1 through 8 will stand for the book cover color. The wild card just means I can choose whatever book I want. So that's kind of like a freebie, as long as it's set in Europe, South America, or Antarctica. All right, so let's go ahead and roll our 8-sided die one more time and see what color cover we are going to be searching for. I'm hoping for white because that is the book color cover that I need to read for this month. So we'll see. Here we go. 1. Red. All right, we need to find a book whose color is predominantly red. All right, we need to find a book cover whose color is predominantly red and set in either Europe, South America, or Antarctica. So this should be fun. All right, I'll be back with some options because I do not think I have a book on my TBR that would fit this, but I'm going to double check. All right, I'll be back shortly with our options. All right, so after looking through a bunch of books, I have narrowed it down to two books to choose from. Since the last book we read was from Europe, I decided for this one we'll go with a South America or Antarctica book. I did not really find a Antarctica book, so we're going to go with South America. And I found 2 books that have red covers that look to me to be interesting to read. So neither of these books have I heard of before, which is the fun of this game. All right, it has featured me inserting a clip in right here for one main reason, and that is one of the authors that I am going to be discussing in the next section is actually non-binary, which I did not realize until after I already recorded the section. They came out after the book that we are going to talk about had already been published, so everything that was written when I was just doing a quick glance over the book did not mention that. The author I'm talking about, last name is De Robertis. They also go by a different name now than what is the author on the book cover. So when I do talk about them, I am going to put up in the corner their name as well as their pronouns. And then after that section, we will discuss them using the correct pronouns and name. I just wanted to insert this clip here so that we are using the correct pronouns for the author. All right, moving on with the video. So our first book choice is Perla by Carolina de Robertis. And you can see on the cover that It's mostly red, especially with the flowers that are so predominant on that left side of the cover. So this is a short historical fiction book. It's only like 236 pages, and it follows Perla, who grew up who grew oh my gosh, who grew up as a privileged only child in Buenos Aires, Argentina, South America, and she had a kind of polished, aloof mother and a straight-laced naval officer father whose profession she learned early on not to disclose in a country still reeling from the abuses perpetuated by the military dictatorship. So Perla understands that her parents were on the wrong side of that conflict, but she obviously still loves her father. Her love for him is unconditional. Then one day she is startled by an uninvited visitor who then has her begin a journey that will force her to confront the unease she has long suppressed and make a wrenching decision about who she is and who she will become. It says that this book is based on the truth of 30,000 disappeared Argentinian citizens and 500 babies who are born in clandestine detention centers, torn from their mother and secretly given up for adoption. So that's kind of the serious history that this book delves into, something that we don't obviously really learn a lot about living up here in the United States. The author was born in England, but her family is from Uruguay, so she also kind of has that family history from South America as well. So we kind of meet that on both aspects for this book. The author's family, her heritage is from Uruguay, and the book itself is set in South America and Brazil. No, Buenos Aires is not Brazil. Argentina. Our second book is set in Brazil, which is what I was going for. So our second book is Ways to Disappear. It's by Idra Novi, also a shorter book, only 272 pages. And this is more of a mystery humor fiction book. So this book mainly follows Emma, who is a American translator living in Pittsburgh. And one of the authors she translates from is the Brazilian writer Beatriz Yagoda, who has kind of abruptly vanished in Brazil. When Emma hears this, she immediately flies to Brazil against the wishes of her own boyfriend as well as Beatrice's two grown children. And there in the heart of Rio, Emma and her author's children conspire to solve the mystery of Beatrice's curious disappearance, as well as staunch the colorful demands of her various outstanding affairs, including a loan shark and the washed up and disillusioned editor who launched Beatrice's career years earlier. So this one is a little bit more on the humorous side of things. So I think out of these two books, the one I'm going to go with is the historical fiction book Perla by Carolina de Robertis, because I think it'll be interesting to read about historical events that I am not familiar with that are set in a different country. So that is a book we are going to go with. Again, it's only 236 pages, at least the hardcover. Let me check the Kindle version because I have been caught on that before when I thought a book was 400 pages and it turned out to be over 600. Let me see what the Kindle version is real quick. 258 pages. All right, so not that different. Perfect. So it's like way past tea time now, but I am going to have some tea. And my tea time treat. My cat's going to have her tea time treat. And we're going to get started on this book, which we may or may not finish tonight. It shouldn't take that long though. So hopefully at the latest, I'll have it finished by tomorrow morning. I'm excited to read this book and kind of see where this story goes. So I will touch base back here once I've finished it, and we'll go ahead and conclude this trip, and then we will start trip 2, which will have 2 different destinations. Well, it will have a different combination of destinations. So we could still have Europe, we could still have South America and Antarctica, but if we get them together, that means we respin. All right. Anyway, I'll see you guys back here at the fireplace when I've completed this book, and I'll let you know what I thought about it. So I'll see you guys soon. All right. All I can say about this book is wow. I'm not usually a big fan of literary fiction. I do read it every now and then because I do like to get a wide range in books that I read. So for challenges like this, I may insert a literary fiction book in that I typically would not otherwise. And this book is probably one of the best literary fiction books that I have read. It also has a little bit of historical fiction in it, as well as some magical realism. And the author just really took all these different genres and tied them up in a neat little bow. I don't know what else to say. So, this book, Perla, follows Perla, who is a woman who was born in Argentina, was raised by was raised as the daughter of a naval officer and his wife, and kind of grew up in a very well-to-do house, well-to-do family, and was born at the time where the country was being ruled by a military dictatorship that would disappear people. 30,000 people ended up being disappeared in Argentina during this time that ended in 1983, I believe. So when Perla was younger, her parents never really talked to her about things that were going on in her country at that time. They wanted to, they say, protect her, but obviously keep her from knowing that her father may be part of this dictatorship that was causing people to disappear. And as she grew up and went to school, and as her peers got older, she started to learn about these people that were disappearing. And her parents just kept telling her that those are lies. They probably just ran away and were living a better life elsewhere. And she continued to believe this. The book starts out when she's in college getting a degree in psychology. And one day she comes home. Her parents are in Uruguay having a vacation. So she comes home alone and she finds a man sitting in her living room, and he is just dripping water. And she soon comes to realize that, is this man alive? Is this man real? Is this a kind of hallucination, a delusion? Is this a ghost? Is this a spirit? And the rest of the book kind of takes her down the pathway to figure out who this man is and why he is in her home, constantly dripping water. This book is a coming of age story as Perla learns more about her parents, her background, and we learn a lot through it about what happened in Argentina during this time of the military dictatorship. And we learn more about the men and women who disappeared, as well as what happened to their children. So, a very serious subject matter. The author's language is definitely in that literary sphere. It's very flowery, but it's very readable as well and very engaging. I'm not quite sure how they do it, because typically with flowery language, I just have a very hard time paying attention and keeping myself engaged. But I didn't have an issue with it in this book. I think it's because the way the author used the subject matter and how they also insert dialogue in between some of this flowery language that made it a lot more engaging, a lot more readable. It obviously dealt with some very tough topics, so this is not a book that I would read at any time. You definitely have to be in kind of the right space to be able to read with it and engage with it, because it deals with a lot of difficult topics, and definitely a book that you want to look up the spoilers for before you read it, or not the spoilers, the triggers, before you read it, because there's definitely a lot of different triggers within this book. I don't usually rate literary fiction books that often because they are usually just not my genre that I like to read. And like I said at the beginning, though, this is one of the best literary fiction books I've read. And not only is it well written, it also gives you a insight into a different country's history, and you kind of get to learn a little bit more about what happened to people in that country. So this is a great book if you want to delve into another country's history. The author themselves are of Uruguay heritage, and they also have some Argentina heritage as well. So they actually travel to Buenos Aires, which is where this book takes place, and talk to people who were affected by those that had disappeared, family members, historians. They actually kind of went and did their own research to be able to write this book. So it makes it feel, I think, more even more kind of authentic. So that was Perla, which I think was a excellent choice for this game. I'm very happy that I got a chance to read it and to learn more about something that I was never really aware of. So that was, that's the point of this game. So I'm very, very happy about that. But we have finished our first trip on this journey to Europe, South America, and Antarctica, and I think we have time to do one more trip. So let's go ahead and get ready to go on our second trip for this Bookish vacation game. First up, we're going to have to see where we are going. All right, so all our boarding passes are in our boarding pass packages, carriers. I rearranged them so we don't know what color belongs to what. So let's bring up the color wheel and see what two boarding passes that we will be choosing. All right, here's our spinning wheel. Let's see what two colors we will be going with. Here we go, spin one. I am hoping for Fantasy World this time, I think. All right, we got the pink boarding pass. Let's pull that one out here. Here's our pink one. All right, well, let's go ahead and do a second spin. See what our second color is going to be. All right, so our second boarding pass is going to be orange. So let's see our destinations for trip number 2. All right, we'll do the pink one first. Here we go. And we are going to Africa. All right, that's our first destination. And then our second destination is going to be back to South America and Antarctica. All right, so those are our 2 destinations. The only issue with this one is I will not be reading any books off my TBR, but that's okay. I am excited to see what books we'll be reading for this, our second trip. So let's bring up the game board and go ahead and do our first roll. All right, here is our game board. Let's see what mode of travel we'll be traveling by. All right, here is our transportation spin wheel. Let's go ahead, spin it, see how we'll be traveling. Airplane. Perfect. We'll be traveling by airplane, which is the shortest route, which is perfect for our second trip. So there's only 5 spaces that we have to get through. All right, let's go ahead and do our first roll. We got a 2. I think that's how we started out our last game. 1, 2. All right, we'll be traveling. Well, we already said that. We'll be traveling by plane. What I mean is, let's bring up our Bookish vacation game choices and see how we're going to choose our book. Here we go. Ooh, looks like dice roll challenge again, almost to the baggage tag, but we will be playing the dice roll game. All right, same rules as last time. On the side, I'll put up what each number stands for. We'll roll a number twice, and then we have to find a book that picks our final option or matches our final option. So here we go. Roll number 1. That's a 4. So we will be choosing a book via the publication year. All right, so roll number 2, we'll choose which publication years. And it's a 8 wild card. So this pretty much means I can choose whatever book I want, which is perfect. I'm excited about that. So I will come back to you when I have some options, and then we'll go ahead and choose the book. All right, so for our first roll for trip number 1, we rolled a 2, and we spun our wheel and got to choose our book using that dice roll challenge, which ended up with us getting a wild card pick, meaning we can choose any book that we want as long as it's set in South America, Antarctica, or Africa. So when I went to look for books set in one of those continents, I narrowed it first down to books that had white covers because, like I said in the beginning of this video, one of my goals for this game is to read a book with a white cover, and this is a perfect chance to do this since it's a wild pick. So I was able to narrow it down to 3 books. 2 are set in Africa, 1 is set in Antarctica. Because we just read a book from South America, I didn't look into book set there for this particular role. So the first book is book one in a series known as Max McLean, and it is called The Break Line and is written by James Brabazon. And it follows Max McLean, who's a British intelligence operative who ends up having to go to Sierra Leone on a seemingly one-way mission. And when he is there, he kind of starts seeing these horrors beyond his nightmares, where rebel forces are loose in the jungle and someone or something is slaughtering innocent villagers. So it's his job to root out whoever is doing that. So that is our first book set in Africa. Our second book is When the Ground is Hard by Mala Nunn. So this book is set in a boarding school in Swaziland and follows two girls of different castes. So the first one, Adele, loves being one of the popular girls at her academy. She's very excited about the upcoming semester, getting to hang out with her best friend. That is until her best friend dumps her for the new girl who has more money. And Adele ends up being forced to share a room with Lottie, who is known at the school as a school pariah. She doesn't follow rules. She doesn't pray. This is a Christian academy. But they ended up bonding over a shared copy of Jane Eyre, and Lottie's gruff exterior starts to grow on Adele. So together, as their bond grows, they end up taking on bullies. They protect each other from the vindictive and prejudiced teachers. Then a boy ends up going missing on campus, and Adele and Lottie have to kind of rely on each other to solve the mystery and maybe even learn the true meaning of friendship. So that is our second option. And then our last option is the book set in Antarctica. It's a science fiction horror book called The Thing Itself, and it's by Adam Roberts. And it follows two men who are working in a Antarctica research station. Tensions between them begin to build as they argue over a love letter one of them has received. One is practical and open, the other surly, superior, and obsessed with reading one book by the philosopher Kant. And as a storm brews and they lose contact with the outside world, they debate Kant, reality, and the emptiness of the universe. They come to hate each other and they learn that they are not alone. That is the description of the book. So, out of those three books, the one I'm going to go with is When the Ground is Hard, which is our YA book set in a boarding school. There's a couple of reasons for this. The first is set in the country of Swaziland, which I feel is going to be a harder country to find books from. So I want to take that opportunity to be able to read a book from that country so I can mark it off on my map. And then, two, the author actually grew up in Swaziland before moving with her parents to Australia. So we have some firsthand knowledge of living and growing up in that country as well. So that is the book we are going with. It is 257 pages. So hopefully it's a easy, quick read. I'm going to get to reading it and I will be back once I have completed this book and we'll go ahead and do our next roll for trip number 2. All right, I am back and I have completed When the Ground is Hard by Mala Nunn. This was a YA novel set in a boarding school, and overall, it was pretty good. I just have a couple of critiques for it. So this book follows Adele, who is a about 16-year-old girl, a junior in high school, who lives in the city but goes to a private Christian academy that's run by an American in kind of the countryside of Swaziland, which is the country that she is from. The first thing that becomes clear in this book is that there is this social economical inequality at this school and also in the country. So, for the country, the people of the country are kind of divided into three groups. There is the white Caucasian people, the mixed race people, and then the native people from Swaziland. And each group kind of has their own schools, their own social clubs, and they don't really intermingle that much. So Adele, the main character, is the daughter of a native Swaziland woman and a South African Caucasian man who's a, I guess, engineer in Johannesburg. Her father also has his own family in Johannesburg, but he is involved in Adele's and her brother's life. He does give them money They're living in a nice house, and he's paying her tuition for the boarding school that she goes to. Her brother was also attending the boarding school, but he has a really bad case of asthma, and he needs to be near a hospital, which is why he no longer attends the boarding school. He basically goes to a online school to get his education. So all the students at the school that Adele goes to are mixed race, but even within the students, they're still divided basically again into three separate groups. So the first group at the school is comprised of the students who come from richer families whose tuitions are paid for in full, and they have new clothes, new suitcases, they have new school uniforms, new school shoes, um and they're able to bring more expensive supplies to school. The next group are students who have a mix of hand-me-downs and newer clothes, and their school fees are paid, but they're paid in installments with whatever money that the families are able to pay the school the tuition with. And then the last group are students whose families can't really afford to pay the tuition. They pay some money here and there, whatever they can really spare, and their clothes are, the hand-me-down clothes, and their tuition is really paid for by donations to the school. So those are kind of the three groups, and this is important because Adele, up until this current school year, has been in that top group. The first class group is what she calls it, and her tuition is always paid in full, and her father makes sure that her mother, brother, and sister are provided for. They're never hungry. Their rent's always paid. The electricity, they have whatever basically they want. They can import stuff from England, so they have, the fancy clothes. So up until this point, she's always been in that first class group. She has three other friends who are also in that first class group as well, whose families are all rich. The only difference is between those three and Adele is that those three live with their fathers. Their fathers and mother are married, while Adele's father lives with his other family basically in South Africa and only visits Adele and her family. So, why that's important is that this book starts off in a new term where Adele is a junior and she's excited to go to school to hang out with her friends. But when she gets to where the bus picks them up and drives them to their school, she is realized that she has been replaced by a different girl whose father and mothers, whose father's side of the family, mother's side of the family both own businesses, and they're married as well, and they are just basically richer than Adele's family. So Adele ends up getting kicked out of this group, and because she is late to arrive at the bus stop, the only seats that are left are the seats in that group where the students who are more poor reside. So she ends up having to go to a seat in that social group and ends up sitting next to another girl named Lottie. Now, Lottie has been going to this school the entire time Adele has, and Adele has known her kind of as the pariah of the school. That is what the schoolgirls kind of have labeled her. They're, definitely the mean girls making fun of the girls who are less fortunate. And Adele has always been one of those girls that has kind of talked down about Lottie, and now she finds her sitting next to her. And not only that, when they get to the school, Adele has been kicked out of her room that she shared with the three other girls, replaced by that new girl. And because all the other rooms are already filled, she has been roomed with Lottie in the room that no one wants because in the last year, a girl had actually gotten sick and they believe died in that room. They're not sure if she died in that room or at the hospital later, but the girls believe she died in that room, and that room now has her spirit in it. So no one wants to room in that room, but here Adele is. She's been placed in this room, not only placed in this room, but also placed in the room with Lottie, who no one at the school likes. She has no friends. So, of course, in the beginning of the story, Adele is trying to figure out how she can get back into her popular friend group, but she very quickly realizes that, almost too quickly, which I'll come back to, that that is not going to happen. And she starts to realize that Lottie may not be as bad as her and her friends thought she was, previously. And Lottie and her actually end up bonding over a Jane Eyre book. And Adele starts to realize that you can't really judge people based on where they come from. So that's kind of what the book is about. Honestly, reading about this boarding school reminds me of a lot of other boarding school books that I've read where there's that popular group, the, group of mean, popular girls, boys, whatever, and looking down on others who are different. And that's kind of what this book is. And Adele's able to kind of break out of that thought and comes to realize that you need to judge a person by who they are and not where they come from. So, the two big critiques I have for this book, the first is how quickly Adele comes to accept that she's no longer going to be in that popular group. Is within the first one or two chapters. And I feel like that is probably not as accurate. I feel like in real life that she would have tried a little bit harder to get herself back into the popular group, knowing that those in the popular group have it easier. They don't have to worry about people putting them down, and they don't have to worry about the teachers who treat that popular group differently because those parents are the ones that are paying the tuition as well as donating things to the school. For example, that new girl, her father donated a generator to the school. So that's one of my critiques. I feel like eventually she would come to, the conclusion that she did, that you can't judge people where they come from. But I felt that initial part of her realizing she's never going to get back in with the popular girls came a little bit too quickly. The other critique I have is that, like I said, the two girls, Lottie and Adele, bond over Jane Eyre. And this book kind of spoils the plot of Jane Eyre all the way up until the ending. So if you haven't read Jane Eyre and you do want to read it without being spoiled, I would read that first before picking up this book because it pretty much goes over what happened from the beginning to the end of the Jane Eyre book. Which, because Jane Eyre has been out so long, like, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I just wish they would have put a little disclaimer in the beginning of the book that there will be spoilers for another book within this book, because I haven't read Jane Eyre. I'm still going to read it. I don't really mind getting spoiled that much. So, but I do feel like they should have put a little disclaimer in the beginning about that. Other than that, I really did enjoy the two main characters of Adele and Lottie. I do like how their friendship developed, and I kind of like the lessons that were put forth in this book through Adele and how, she comes to realize that, money isn't everything. The author herself is from Swaziland, and as well as her parents. She no longer lives there. I think she lives in Australia now, but she did grow up there. So she was able to kind of put her own um experiences into the book as well as her, mothers and aunts and things like that. So it felt realistic from that standpoint. And I feel like you did get to know a little bit more about that country, Swaziland, through reading the book, because while the main part of the book was obviously set in boarding school, the author had the girls kind of discuss like things outside the boarding school. There were some parts that took place outside the boarding school as well. So I feel like you kind of got to learn about the country a little bit more through that. So overall, I did enjoy the book. It's definitely not a book with a lot of action in it. It's more a book that is a character-driven book where the main character is kind of changing her thought process. So there's a lot of that within it. But yeah, I guess there are probably a couple of triggers too, just to look into before you read the book. But other than that, I think this was a good introduction into the country of Swaziland. And again, this is why we play the game, so that we can learn a little bit more about other countries. So that's all I have for When the Ground is Hard. Let's go ahead and bring up the game board and see what we are going to get for our second roll of trip number 2. All right, here we are, right here, there are 4 spots until we get to the end. So my rule, I keep kind of changing this rule, but my rule is I have to read at least 2 books for each trip, and I have to read at least 3 books for the entire Bookish vacation video. So we are at the 3 books. So I have to read at least 1 more book on this game. So let's go ahead and do our second roll. A 2. All right, we move forward 2 spots, not too bad. Now that we have read 2 books for this trip and a total of 3 books for the vacation game, once we do get to the finish line, we don't need to read any more books for this game. All right, let's bring up the Bookish vacation game choices to choose our book and see how we are going to choose our next book. Here we go. All right, so here is our spin wheel. Let's go ahead and spin it and see what we get. Oh, looks like we got our suitcase prompt. So we will be choosing a suitcase, and then we will just have to match a book or read a book that matches that prompt. So here are all our suitcases. So let's go ahead and choose one. I think I'm going to go with a pink one. I think maybe this pink one with the orange. This is a pretty one. So we'll go with this suitcase. All right, so we moved forward 2 spaces, which is not too bad, and we got our suitcase prompt. We got the suitcase we chose right here, which has these cute little flowers on it. It's an orange one, so let's go ahead, open it, and see what prompt we got inside. Here we go. All right, let's open it up. See if we can get it to focus then. Here we go. I don't know if that's focused. There we go. Less light. That looks focused. All right, it says title has at least 2 words that start with the same letter. And then obviously the book also has to be set in Antarctica, South America, or Africa. So that's not too bad. And we already fulfilled our white cover goal. So that basically means we can choose any book that the title has 2 words that start with the same letter. So that should give us some good options. So I'm going to go take a look, see what pull up some options, and then I'll meet you guys back here and let you know what the options are and what book we're going to go with. So I'll see you guys soon. All right, that was a little bit more difficult than I thought it was going to be, but we do have some choices that we'll be choosing from for this prompt where 2 words have to start with the same letter. So all 3 are from the South American continent, and that is because we just did Africa. I wanted to switch around to South America. I did look at Antarctica, but I couldn't really find any books that met the prompt and also interest me at this time. So that's why I kind of stuck with South America. All right, so our first option is The Sisters of Alameda Street, which is by Lorena Huge, and it is set in Ecuador, I believe. Yes, 1960s Ecuador. So it's a historical fiction book with a little bit of a mystery, as well as some romance mixed in. So the book follows Melina, whose carefully planned world collapses following her father's mysterious suicide. She ends up finding a letter that is just signed with an A. And it reveals that her mother is very much alive and living in San Isidro, which is a quaint town that's tucked in the Andes Mountains. So she wants to meet her. She travels to Alameda Street, and there she meets 4 sisters who couldn't be more different than from one to another, but who all share one thing in common. All of their names begin with an A. So, to avoid a scandal, Melina assumes another woman's identity, enters their home to discover the truth. Is her mother Amanda, who opens the first tango nightclub in a conservative town? Or is her mother Anna, the ideal housewife with a less than ideal past? Or it could be Abigail, the sickly sister in love with a forbidden man. Or Alejandro, who's the artistic introvert scarred by her cousin's murder. But her arrival also threatens to expose long buried secrets and a truth that may end up wrecking her life forever. Our second option is On a Night of a Thousand Stars, which is set in the 1990s. It follows mainly Paloma, who's the daughter of a wealthy Argentine diplomat, and currently she's in New York a college student, as well as a budding jewelry designer. Everything seems perfect in her world until an unexpected party guest from her father's university days shakes the family's unusually unflappable demeanor. And this woman's cryptic comments sparks Paloma's curiosity about her father's past, which she knows little. So the family ends up traveling to Buenos Aires for her father's UN ambassadorial appointment. And there, Paloma is determined to learn more about his life in the years leading up to the military dictatorship of 1976. So Paloma ends up unleashing a chain of events that not only leads her to question her family and her identity, but also puts her own life in danger. So that's our second option. So our last option is set in the Falkland Islands, which is a British overseas territory that has their own government and set off of the coast of Argentina. It's a little group of islands. I think I said that. And this book is Little Black Lies by Sharon J. Bolton. And it's a mystery thriller book where in the Falkland Islands, in the village in the Falkland Islands, children begin to go missing. And when the third one goes missing, the villagers finally have to accept that these deaths are not accidental, that there is a murderer among them. And so the villagers begin to try to find who is doing this terrible thing, including Katrin Quinn, who is a woman living a reclusive life on the island after the accidental deaths of her own two sons that happened a few years ago. Then the other part of the synopsis also says that Katrin, her childhood best friend Rachel, and her ex lover Caleb are all holding these terrible secrets, and they also have two things in common. All three of them are grieving, and none of them trust anyone, not even themselves. So that is a synopsis of that book. Now we have to decide which one we are going to choose. They all sound like they could be really good reads, but I am going to eliminate On a Night of a Thousand Stars by Andrea Yarura Clark. And the only reason I am eliminating this, because I do really want to read it, is that it is also set in Argentina and discusses the same kind of time period that one of our previous books did about the military dictatorship in Argentina. So I don't kind of want to repeat a book that's very similar to one that we already read. So we're going to eliminate that one. So that leaves us either reading a book set in the Falkland Islands or a book set in Ecuador, both of which have a little bit of a mystery going on. I really don't know what one to choose. They're also exactly the same number of pages, 368, so that doesn't even help. All right, I think I'm going to go with a mystery thriller just because I already read a bunch of kind of historical fiction books that had a little bit more of a slow moving plot. And to end this video, I want to read a book that's a little bit faster paced, which I believe this mystery thriller set in the Falkland Islands will be. So we are going to go with Little Black Lies by Sharon J. Bolton, with Little and Lies starting with the same letter. So we meet the prompt. It's set in the Falkland Islands, which is in the South American continent. So we also meet that prompt. So that is what we are going to go with. We're just going to kind of switch it up a little bit from our historical literary fiction to a true mystery thriller book. The other two books I am definitely going to write down, though, because I do want to read them at some point. So I'm going to add them to my future reads list and hopefully get to them in a future game, maybe even in another Bookish Vacation game journey. So I am going to go sit down, have some lunch, start Little Black Lies, and then I will meet you back here once I finish the book. We'll do what will hopefully be our last roll, as long as we get anything above a 1. But now that I put that out into the universe, we'll probably end up getting a 1. But we will see. And yeah, I'll let you know how I felt about this book at the end of my journey reading it. So I'll meet you guys back here in a little bit. All right, I am back and I have completed Little Black Lies by Sharon Bolton, which is our book that took place at the Falkland Islands. Overall, I would give it somewhere probably like a 3.75. Overall, it was a good read for a mystery thriller book. There's definitely some twists that were unexpected and surprising. As can be expected in these types of books, and I enjoyed the journey from the beginning to the end. So the way this book was put together was interesting. It was separated into 3 main sections. Each section was devoted and told from the first person viewpoint for each of the 3 main characters. So the character that we are following in the first section is Katrin, who 3 years previously had lost her sons in a unfortunate accident. And since then, she has been trying to deal with the grief from that accident and also kind of making plans for revenge for the person that was involved in the accident that ended up killing her sons. So that's our first section. In our second section, we follow Calum, who is Katrin's kind of on again, off again boyfriend. He was not the father of her sons. The father of her sons was Ben, who she ended up divorcing after the accident happened. Before then, she was already kind of having an affair with Calum and wasn't really in love with her husband. Calum is from Scotland. He was part of the British forces that were sent to the Falkland Islands in 1982 during the Falkland Island War between the British Islands and Argentinian forces. So he had showed up in 1982 for that, and he ended up going back home to Scotland where he developed PTSD, and he ended up coming back to the Falkland Islands because mostly for Katrin, who, while he hadn't really ever talked to her that much, he kind of was falling in love with her. So he wanted to go back to the islands to see if that relationship could, become serious, or the no relationship could become a relationship. And then our last section, we follow the character Rachel, who was Catelyn's best friend until the accident that took her sons. And Rachel was involved in that accident, and she's having trouble kind of coming to terms with her part in that accident. And we kind of learn about that. So, the plot of this book is that there have been missing boys who have disappeared from the Falkland Islands over the last 3 years or 2 years. And when this book starts off, another boy has gone missing. He was not a local, which the other two boys were. He was part of a family who was there as tourists, and he ends up disappearing. And obviously, a big search starts, and we kind of start following Caitlin, Callum, and Rachel, who, because of their past, become kind of suspects in the case of a missing boy. It's very hard to explain without not fully putting out spoilers there, but that's kind of the gist of the story. There's a lot more that happens than just that. But that's kind of where the story starts. How it's split into sections is interesting. The story takes place kind of around November 3rd, 1994, which is 3 years to the day that the accident happened to Katrin's children. And the book is kind of centering around that loss, as well as how the characters are dealing with the disappearance of this boy who disappeared at this time as well. So each section takes place around this time period, and when we get to each section, we go a little bit back in time and read about stuff that we've already learned about from a different person's viewpoint and this new character's viewpoint. So that was kind of interesting, especially between the Catram and Rachel sections. We kind of go over the exact same time period in both of those sections. Dude, this book is super hard to explain. But overall, it was a good book. It was definitely a engaging plot that kept your attention. There was things going on, and there were little cliffhangers that were scattered throughout the book that kept your interest going. There are definitely trigger warnings in this book, and definitely something to look into if you decide to read this book. I did enjoy as well that while the main focus was centered around the missing children, there, with Caleb being a part of the story, we also do learn a little bit about what happened in the Falkland War. So we do get a little bit of history that's kind of scattered throughout the book because of his PTSD that he had from the war. So you do learn a little bit of history in this book as well. You learn a little bit about the Falkland Islands and the people who live there as well, which again is the point of this reading game. The characters were as developed as I expect them to be in a mystery thriller book. They aren't fully developed characters, and if you didn't know what viewpoint you're reading from, it would be hard to distinguish some of the characters, especially Rachel and Catram because the voices that you're reading their viewpoint through sound very similar. But I feel like that's true for a lot of mystery thriller books. There's also not a lot of buildup on our secondary characters, and I had trouble keeping some of them straight because they do play a role in this book, and it was difficult sometimes trying to remember who was who in the story unless there was little context clues that were put in place because they just weren't built up that much. And for me, if they're not like built up into kind of their own character, I definitely have trouble keeping people straight just through their names alone. So yeah, so that was Little Black Lies, a book to read if you are interested in the mystery thriller set in the Falkland Islands and don't mind any of the triggers that occur within the book. It was definitely a good thriller as far as the twists and turns went. The little cliffhangers scattered throughout the book made it, like I said, an engaging read that kept you reading because you wanted to know who was doing all this, which you do find out by the end of the book. So that is the story. All right, so let's bring up the game board and see what we're going to get for our third roll of trip number 2. Anything 2 or greater, it means we have completed the game. So let's see what happens. All right, here we are back on our game board. We are right there. There's only 2 spots to the finish. So let's go ahead and see what we get for this, our third roll for this trip. And it's a 2. We just made it to the end, which means we have completed our Bookish vacation game for July. All right, we just made it to the finish line with a 2, but that means we have completed our Bookish vacation game for July. We got to read 4 books, which I think is pretty impressive, all set in different countries and territories, which means when we come back to this game again, we're going to be able to color in a lot of our map, which I'm excited about. Overall, I definitely really enjoyed this journey. I felt like we had a good mix of books. And I felt like these books taught me some things that I didn't know about for the countries that they were set in, which is the entire point of this game. So I felt from that standpoint, it was very successful. But that will wrap up our game for this month. I hope you enjoyed watching this video and watching this game as much as I enjoyed playing it. I thank you so much for joining me for this trip through, where did we go? We went to Africa, South America, and Europe. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. If you want to see future videos from me, please hit that subscribe button. Coming up will be my reading journal video next month, where we'll fill out my reading journal for the months of for April, May, and June. And I'll give you little reviews for the books that were not actually reviewed in any other videos. And then after that, we'll be doing our August TBR. And we'll see how well I did in my July TBR at that point. Thank you once again for joining me for today's video. And I hope everyone's July TBRs are going well. And I will see you in my next video next week. Take care. Bye.